Over the next 30 minutes, I'm going to take you for a bit of a wander through some different subjects covering different matters, partly highlighted by the output of last year's technical conference, and I know there were some requests for an update on where we are with food waste management. But in addition to that, I'll take you through some of the bigger issues of what's going on in Europe. Yes, we'll start off with the Brexit issue. Fats, oils and grease will cover connectivity of equipment, water and energy labelling. So hopefully there'll be something in here for all of you to enjoy, and we will get started. So EURIS, which is EU Representation Industrial Strategy, it's a collective of 13 trade associations representing 1.1 million employees and a turnover about just under 150 billion per year. 52 billion of that are exports, and the 13 associations, of which CESA is part of that group, have come together to influence government and to be the informal sounding board for the government as it evolves what it's going to do as part of the UK withdrawal discussion. As we sit in this room now, there are an additional 1,000 civil servants in Victoria Street who are wrestling with the issue of the UK withdrawal from Europe. When you walk down the offices of what was a fairly windy and open government department, which almost had tumbleweed going through it, it's like a call centre with minimal desks, only 3.5 foot, 4 foot wide, a computer screen on it, and lots of very bright young things scoping out what the future is going to look like for the UK. And the two strands of that work are there is a no deal scenario, and the other is a business as usual. So you've got teams of government civil service servants working 180 degrees against one another on different policies. So whether it's either end of that, a no deal, or whether it's business as usual, which is what we currently have, or somewhere in between, they're looking to cover that ground. And EURIS is the interface to provide us as industry with the opportunity to influence what they do. And this is the 6-point wish list that EURIS has put together, which is based around the principles that you see that trade needs to work effectively within what the future is going to look like. Happy to cover any questions on that, and I've embedded the document in these slides, and there'll be others that go through, so I'll ask Peter to put these around afterwards, so if you need more detail, it will be covered in the presentation that I have. So that's where we are with the big issue of Brexit. It's got major issues for trade and business, as we all know, but we are the interface to helping government to get to a better place on all of this. If I look then at the bigger issue of what's going on across in Europe, whether we're part of it or not part of it, it's climate change, or as it was described 5 years ago when I stood up and did a similar presentation, climate disruption. It was climate change then, and I think we all recognise it's climate disruption now. And I put these slides together last week, and you will have seen over the last 48 hours or so the significant work that's gone on in terms of us probably not hitting the 1.5 degree increase in temperature target. It looks like that's unattainable with the consequences that we know that will come from that. And I put this slide up because I think it's useful, and the two red lines are on the left where we are now and where we'll be in 10 years' time, and 10 years' time is not that far away, but look at the change that's going on in the requirement for the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. It's significant, and the reason I put this up there is, if I leave you nothing else today on this issue, don't expect that nothing's going to change or that the change is going to be measured. It's going to be dramatic in terms of what goes on. Because you see the main sectors there, power, residential, industry, transport, agriculture, and other CO2 sectors there at the bottom. This is where we've got to end up at by 2050 if we're going to achieve that 1.5 degrees centigrade goal. It looks likely that this line is going to have to come forward. It's going to have to come forward to achieve those objectives. That's going to affect every single one of our businesses. And we can't ignore it. We ignore it at our peril, because let's take one example of that, the transport sector. It's going to mean inevitably a move towards electric vehicles. That we know is going to come at a cost. that new technology is not going to be at the same cost as a combustion engine. So it's going to have a direct effect on business. It's going to affect how many miles an engineer can do in a day, all sorts of different things. So operationally, there are some significant issues that need to be considered. So every part of our business and consumer lives are going to be affected by this, as the European policy seeks to drive down those greenhouse gas emissions. And how are they going to do that? The top three on the left there, you see decarbonisation, clean energy transition, more renewables. That will have an effect somewhere else in food waste. We'll come on to that in a second. And reindustrialisation, the move to circular economy, that we don't use any more resources than we already have on the planet. Low carbon innovation and clean transport under that reindustrialisation, and that's a major change that's going to happen. And it's going to affect every area of our life. The bottom left-hand box there, they're all the key areas that are part of EU policy that will come across into the UK. Whether we're in Europe or out Europe, it's the same policy because we're signed up to the same agreement. 127 nations are signed up to that climate change policy agreement. And the three issues on the bottom right, decarbonisation, so that's taking the carbon dioxide out of all the processes that we're engaged in. Digitalisation, how digital will become more pervading in managing what we're doing, smart buildings, building management systems, the operational issues relating to business will be there. And decentralisation, and that's principally the decentralisation of power supplies. So what we plug into isn't necessarily coming off a grid, it's through solar powers on a roof that are charging a battery that's somewhere else in a building, and the energy is being drawn off that. And also later on, when I finish, Nick Arino will come up and talk about some of the issues in terms of gas supply and how that has the potential to change to address the CO2 emissions from gas. So those bottom three are what's going to drive the issues there. And the EU sees itself working on those key areas there to address those issues in a little bit more detail. So there you get a bit more of the focus. And you can see the local agenda moving down that list in urban areas. 70% of greenhouse gas emissions come from urban areas. So they're going to be a major focus as our connected lives also manage greenhouse gas reductions. Again, an Orgalim white paper. Orgalim is the European body that represents mechanical and electrical engineering associations. Produces significant work and is the interface with the Commission on our behalf, and there's a paper there that you may be interested in reading if you'd like more detail. So that's the bigger picture. The change is going to be dramatic and radical. What's going on a little bit more locally? I was asked to focus a little bit more on food waste this year, so what I want to do is give you an overview of that. This is the map of implementation, the top end. So Scotland has itself sorted out, Northern Ireland has through its own regulation, Wales has, but is taking a second bite at it actually, and England, the work is going on, and we'll talk in a little more detail about that in just a second. But the principle of managing waste, and in this case food waste, is down to the pyramid that you see there. That's the waste hierarchy as it's known. Which has to be adhered to except where technical, economic, environmental and practical conditions allow. So it allows a little bit of an escape clause where those issues arise. So if we look at the implementation across the UK, we've devolved a lot of this work to the national governments. So we have 4 separate implementations for what is effectively a national initiative to reduce food waste and manage food waste in a coordinated manner. That causes a significant problem for national groups because they'll be required to do different things in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and England. That's the potential problem. But let's look in a little bit more detail there in terms of the Waste England and Wales Amendment 2012. Certainly that was left for local authorities to decide. It's the local authorities that inevitably collect the waste. They have separate PFI agreements for waste management, so they will drive their own initiatives, but mostly focused around a preference from DEFRA for anaerobic digestion, so that the output can be reused in terms of renewable energy or other byproducts. Fairly active ban on or prevention of sink to sewer as a disposal was sought, partly because the anaerobic digestion sector needs a huge amount of feedstock. So that's the sort of preference, but there isn't any defined regulation for England at the moment. As far as Scotland is concerned, a much more interventionist approach where in urban areas there has to be curbside collection, but dewaterers are allowed in terms of being part of the process to reduce the overall volume and mass of water within the food waste. If we then look specifically at Wales, the guidelines, in fact the regulation has been published preventing sink to sewer disposal, but there is a review of those regulations because of the issue of dewaterers and perhaps other forms of sink to sewer disposal, but there are extended delays. We've been waiting since the late spring for the output of this work to come, and we still haven't seen it as yet. I think it's getting caught up in the other work that's going on in England at the moment. But there you see the extract from the regulation in terms of what that's proposing. And in Northern Ireland, it was a similar approach. They mandated separate food waste collection. We lobbied very hard and met with the authorities there, as we have done in all the other regulation that's gone through. We're advocating a pragmatic approach that operators should be able to use the system that best meets their needs in a responsible manner. Northern Ireland, they're requiring separate waste collection, but they've got very little anaerobic digestion capacity. So it's a bit of a dichotomy of what's going on there. So maybe separate collection, but where it goes is questionable, and some of that may be going to landfill or being exported. But dewaterers are allowed. But based around this is the European principle, which has still got some way to go. The regulation that was published in the spring of this year shows that packaging, landfill and waste are covered under that directive. 2 years to implement, and Michael Gove has said that the UK will pass it into law. That will create a problem because that will then be Westminster probably overruling what's going on in the national governments. There have already been spats on this with the politicians, and we'll see more of those. But there's a requirement for separate waste collection by 2024 in the developed member states of Europe, and for all others to follow in 2027. And there is a big piece of work going on at the moment in terms of a one-year study onto the best food waste reduction methodologies, and that's not only reduction, but it's waste management too. So will there be another or new environment agency set up to oversee this? We don't know. We don't know which court system will prevail, and we'll see which will come to fruition there. We will move against the principles of any single solution because it disadvantages innovation in our industry from a manufacturer point of view, and it discourages the operator, the kitchen designer, to look at what is best practice within that particular establishment to meet the needs. And as part of that, we are in the process at the moment of finishing the drafting of a document that explains some of what I put in there, as well as putting a CESA position together in terms of what we deem as effective food waste management. And that will link into a major piece of work that's going on at the moment. The UK is putting together a big piece of work which will link into the European work that I've just talked about, looking at addressing the whole issue of food waste. And there is a roadmap that's just been published by WRAP, the Waste Resources Action Programme, looking at targeting, measuring and acting on the food waste that's being generated, not only in food service but also in retail. This is the roadmap, and let's just highlight the particular area there, which shows as part of that roadmap basically a robust study of what's going on with food waste and sink to sewer disposal and where that has an effect. Major issue on sink to sewer disposal is not with our industry, it's actually with abattoirs who wash a lot of waste down the sewer as a result of what they do. And this is why in England, DEFRA have been much more pragmatic because of the number of abattoirs that there are in the UK, but it also that food waste is similar to what is being produced from food service establishments. So to move on to something that's aligned, it also has the potential to go down the sewer, and that's fats, oils and grease. And I know you may recall in previous years, if you've been at the conference, that we've embarked on a programme of work to try and look to develop a standard for fats, oils and grease management systems. That group actually wasn't able to agree on a way forward and disbanded only 3 weeks ago. We may revisit it in the future, but there isn't an appetite from industry to be able to get together and produce what would be a standard for evaluating the different types of equipment. At the moment, EN 1825 is the de facto standard for the industry, but that relates primarily to grease traps, not grease removal units, and certainly not enzyme treatment systems. So if any further work does come through on that, we'll be sure to engage across the industry to move that forward. I've also put in just a couple of slides here, if you need it for future reference, which looks at the various standards and what their really top-line shortcomings are, what the issues are. There are North American standards around as well as 1825, and you'll see there's differences in the way that the products are evaluated. What we were trying to do was look at a common ground across all of those that could help the industry move forward at national level, and then we'd do that at European level and international level. There's a need for consolidation here, and I think it will come at some point, but now may not be that issue. And just a little bit further detail of that traffic light system, if you need it, the details are there in terms of the coverage of those standards. All with me so far? Good. Thank you for staying awake this far. Okay. Connectivity, and we've covered that. This really is going to be an issue for us. The digital agenda that's set by Europe is a way of managing energy, and we've got to be part of that. It's going to affect our customers as food service establishments. It's going to affect us as consumers. It's going to affect your business. And understanding data and using data is incredibly valuable. It's incredibly tradable. I don't doubt in 10 years' time, in the same way that every business has got a sales department, a marketing department, a finance department, etc., there'll be a data management department or a head of data management who's responsible for managing the data within the business. It's going to happen, and we need to recognise it, and we need to get onto that case first. The whole digital agenda is really governed by the future of our futures being dominated by connected lives, connected cities. 70% of those greenhouse gases that are in urban areas are represented in this sort of graph, which is a government government diagram from Bayes. We are, at some semblances, at the very bottom level here with the development of building information modelling in the design of buildings. What that is a foundation stone for everything that's going to follow, right through to a bus stop, knowing when we've walked up to it because it's picked up off our phone, and so the bus operator knows to send a bus to pick us up. That's the way in which our worlds are going to move. That's the dynamism, and it's going to pervade everything. But this is the growth, and that's why data is going to be so critical. And through the group that you see at the bottom right of the screen, the Global Food Service Equipment and Supply Summit, we're looking at on an international basis for food service equipment, working with our colleagues in NAFEM in North America, with the European trade associations, and indeed the German DIN standard organisation, it's their BSI, has just produced a standard for connectivity of food service equipment, and we're looking at that evolving into becoming a European standard. So there's a lot of work that's going on behind the scenes, and we're looking to pull that together on behalf of the industry. But you see, it's energy, buildings, transport, production services, waste, use of natural resources, all form part of that particular graph in terms of the way it works, and that's where our lives are going to become more connected, and where food service equipment is going to become more connected to building management systems to control and manage the way it operates, as well as the functional issues of knowing when a piece of equipment is going to break down or when its optimum life may have come to an end. Water, another major issue. It's very high up on the policy and resource work of Europe. How many in the room have experienced problems with a water inspector on equipment? Just raise your hands if you have. Yeah. Right, good. From that, you'll know this work is well overdue. There are two pieces of regulation that affect the supply of wholesome water. One is the construction products regulation, which is what product manufacturers have to produce their products to ensure that it doesn't affect our lives when we consume that water, that drink, whatever it might be. The other piece of work is the Drinking Water Directive, which is what the water companies have to work to provide wholesome drinking water for us all. What that means across Europe is that there are different test standards required in different member states to achieve the requirements of those local water undertakers. What European industry is pushing for is one recognised standard against which manufacturers can produce the product to be able to put those products on sale in the whole of Europe, and to have a centralised materials list of products that can be used in the manufacture so that there isn't a requirement for retesting. It's a huge cost to industry. It also means that there are issues locally in terms of the use of equipment when it's installed to the water supply in the UK, because some of the UK test standards are different to what's available in Europe. I know Paul is here with us today. Certainly if you have any questions on that, I know he'll be happy to answer questions, as will I, where it's appropriate. We're doing some work to try and consolidate and get one recognised system, and we're also in the UK part of the 4 member state working group, which is trying to work through this particular problem. It keeps coming up as a problem with the industry, and we're looking to work that through at European level where we can. We're going to switch tacks now. We're going to mix the water with electricity while we move on to energy labelling. Just really a heads up here. You may recognise that energy labelling on professional refrigeration equipment, it's upright storage cabinets and the like. What I'd say is if any of you are either manufacturing or reselling refrigeration equipment, please ensure that the energy label follows the equipment. I think for the most part, manufacturers are all undertaking their legal responsibility to ensure they're labelling the products, and indeed if they're not, they shouldn't be putting product on the market. But there's an issue where it goes into the reseller network or the supply network that the label has to follow the product. On websites, in catalogues, etc., that label has to follow the product. So if that isn't the case, please correct it. The reason being the National Measurements and Regulation Office are now starting their work to evaluate what's going on in the market, and they will be undertaking checks and taking action where companies don't meet those requirements. If you do need any guidance or advice on that, please come back to us as CESA. We're more than happy to help. We've got full access to all the standards and regulation that you need to adhere to meet the energy labelling requirements there. Good. So now just a roundup of some other elements before I hand over to Nick to conclude this part of the presentation. You'll see on the pop-up just in the middle there, SFG 20, the service schedules. They're out there and available for licensed use. These are the generic service schedules for about 120 different products within a commercial kitchen. They are being used more and more and coming through in terms of specifications for servicing work. We do have a special rate with BESA for the availability of those service schedules. I'd either see Graham, myself, or the CESA team, and Jocelyn Carr and Adam Lawrence are here today and will be out on the CESA stand outside. We'll be pleased to help you with that. Building information modelling, we covered it off a little bit earlier. We co-chair the group that is defining the international parameters for BIM, and there is a lot of convergence between those parameters and other work that's going on, certainly in terms of the circular economy work and the evaluation of products. So having a recognised international set of standards that manufacturers can produce models and data towards that meet those standards, that designers also, when putting kitchens together, recognise those same standards, and also in the service field, because it does link across to those service schedules, that same data and information. So we're doing a lot of top-line work to look at this digital agenda, how it's being addressed, and to pull those strands together and make it 100% relevant for our food service equipment industry supply chain. As part of that, and any CESA members in the room, again, please go to the CESA stand. We're restructuring to give much greater depth on all of these topics, the big issues of circular economy, training and education, the digital agenda, where that's coming through, as it may affect your specific product category. So there's about a dozen core categories of product that we're putting working groups together on, and those committee meetings have been scheduled to go right through to the end of December next year. So the issues that relate directly to you are part of the agenda for those groups. What we just need to do is marry together the individuals who need to be in what groups. So please come and tell us who should be in which product category, and we'll make sure the right person gets the calls for those meetings. And what we've heard in the last sort of 20-25 minutes or so is really about the disruption that's going on in the market, and that we're addressing in the conference in just over a month's time at the Cotswold Water Park, evolving in a disruptive environment. And it's going to be a disruptive environment, but it's something that business needs to look to addressing, harnessing, and taking the appropriate cautionary actions to be part of that journey. And certainly we've got three titans of industry there: the Chief Exec of Electrolux, the Chief Exec of Partstown, one of the world's, if not the world's largest spare parts provider, and also the Managing Director of Nisbets, Klaus Goldenbott, looking at how they see the future. And certainly their vision is probably going to be useful locally to many in this room as well. So if you haven't signed up already, please do so and go through to the website there. So a lot of diverse information there. Thank you very much for keeping your attention. I'm delighted I didn't spot anybody fall asleep. And that's probably the first time I've ever done a presentation. So thank you for your attention on that. And I'll just hand over to Nick Arino, CESA Technical Consultant, to take you through a couple of areas that are very close to his work on behalf of the industry. Thank you all very much.
So, as Keith alluded to this morning, or earlier, the UN report, or the UN-backed report, said that the world has just 12 years to stop global warming. So 2030, it's quite a scary thought, isn't it? Part of my talk this morning is going to be on hydrogen and the potential of using hydrogen. The 2008 Climate Change Act established that the world's first legally binding climate change target aimed to reduce the UK's greenhouse gas emissions by at least 80% from the 1990 baseline by 2050. Well, clearly now that guideline probably will need to accelerate dramatically. HY4 heat programme. The HY4 heat programme is a £25 million government-funded feasibility study to replace natural gas, which is methane, with hydrogen gas for domestic and commercial use, so in heating and cooking. Hydrogen gas obviously when burnt gives off water vapour as opposed to CO2 with natural gas. I attended a recent meeting in London where domestic packages were discussed for equipment manufacturers to bid for development work on producing domestic boilers, cookers, gas fires to operate on hydrogen gas. My understanding at the meeting that a consultant would shortly be appointed to look at the commercial appliances and they would follow on in work package 5. They will then invite commercial appliance manufacturers to bid for research and evaluation work to provide hydrogen burning commercial appliances. Obviously this could be very big for UK manufacturers. It was clear at that meeting, listening to domestic manufacturers, that converting existing appliances may well prove to be an uneconomical proposition, and new appliances designed to run on hydrogen may have to be the answer. Some of you in this room may well remember I can see Wayne, you're nodding. It was some years ago converting town gas to appliances to natural. That was a much simpler process than is going to be the case on this. I would say that these comments were made before detailed evaluation had taken place, or indeed contracts awarded. What is clear is that the government is looking very seriously at hydrogen as a replacement for natural gas. Of course, nuclear and renewable energy is also in the mix to enable the I've put here 2050, but perhaps I should strike that out and it should be 2030 target to be reached. Watch this space on hydrogen, I guess. Second subject is BS 6173. I was originally involved in the panel of 6173-2001, a long time ago now, and then 6173-2009. British standards have agreed that it's time to re-evaluate the standard and review the standard, and I've been asked to chair the panel. We actually met for the first time on the 27th of September. The panel consists of myself as chairman, Peter Bolsch, who's here I know today from ceda, Steve Lombard from the Gas Safe Register, and Chris Dearden from MEDEM, also Andy Barrett, the BSI coordinator. There are two more individuals that have been approached to join the panel. They are involved in training and assessment in the catering industry, so I think they will be very important to be on the panel. I did say at the meeting on the 27th that I would ask today if there's anyone here that would be interested in sitting on the panel and think they can contribute. If you do, and you are interested, if you could perhaps have a chat with me, either at coffee break or sometime today or this evening. I'm here until tomorrow morning. BSI have required a total time frame for review to be a maximum of 18 months. The publication of the revised standard will be March 2020. If anyone's got any questions on these two subjects, I'll be glad to answer them either now, well, try and answer them now, or later, or over the coffee break. That's it. Thank you very much.